The answers are in front of you. Your competitors will be doing a lot of good advertising in your market space, but you can't be the same as those competitors. You need to break the rules and break the function of how you kind of reinvent getting to the classic consumer in your category. And so always look to an industry outside of yours and look for disruption to occur by the clash of those two industries.
Welcome to the Strategy at Scale podcast, brought to you by Scaling Up, Outthinker, and Growth Institute. I'm your host, Kyan Krippendorf. Our mission is to cut through a sea of conflicting business advice and get to what actually works. We talk to entrepreneurs and business builders who successfully scaled companies across industries to extract proven, high-impact strategies for building long-term value. You just heard from Radek Sali, one of Australia's most successful entrepreneurs and a pioneer in the global wellness industry. As CEO of Swisse Wellness, Radek led one of the most iconic growth stories in Australian business history, taking the company from a modest vitamin brand of about $15 million to a $1.7 billion global wellness powerhouse. And along the way, he redefined the category, turned culture into a competitive advantage, and transformed Swisse into Australia's best place to work. But Radek didn't stop there. He co-founded Light Warrior, an investment firm focused on socially responsible business, and today he's building and backing companies that align performance with purpose. From health to education to social impact, he is also a GQ Entrepreneur of the Year and CEO in residence at Melbourne University, further shaping the next generation of entrepreneurial leaders. In this conversation, we unpack the strategic playbook behind that scale, how he built brand flywheels, created differentiation through culture, and designed systems that let passion and performance thrive side by side. In this episode, we touch on things like what it really takes to turn a sleepy, commoditized product into a billion-dollar wellness brand, how to recognize an opportunity in the market that others overlook, why Radek believes purpose, love, and high performance can and should coexist inside a company, how a small team with limited capital built momentum against giants, and the flywheel strategy behind it, what most founders miss when they scale too fast, and how to avoid losing clarity, culture, and control. The unconventional ways Radek built a best place to work culture and why that culture became his biggest strategic advantage. Whether you're scaling a startup or leading transformation in a legacy business, this episode is a masterclass in building a business that performs and inspires. Let's dive in with Radek Sali.
Radek, it is amazing to have you with us. Thank you so much. Where are you joining us from?
From Byron Bay, Australia. It's about an hour and a half south of Brisbane. It's the most easterly point of Australia, so we get first light here.
Amazing. I love it. Yeah, I've been in Brisbane once when my wife and I were scuba diving in the Great Barrier Reef. Beautiful. So it's a gift to be with you. You know, we get to talk to entrepreneurs, we get to talk to investors. It's rare that we get to talk to people who look at it from both kind of a very focused view and also across many companies. So I'm not going to ask you about your story. People know your story. They can find great content about your story. You've got a great book, a bunch of podcasts, a lot written about you. I really want to zoom into strategy and kind of get into your head a little bit. And let's start with what you could say is the first journey of the growth, say, of Swisse from 15 million to almost 800 million being sold and the companies that you look at. How do you identify, or how should an entrepreneur think about identifying whether an opportunity is something that's worth putting their passion and time and money into?
I think number one is your intuition and following your gut, something that you react to and find a connection with. And that connection comes from experience and understanding. And so listening to that, understanding that, you know, you have an innate system that is recording information from the outside all the time. And you will have a personal leaning to information that perhaps you're a little more attracted to than others, that you're more engaged with than others. And then suddenly you become a little bit better at understanding the opportunities that may come from you understanding that thing a little better than others. So I go back to each of us having a superpower, and that superpower is something we need to work on and keep refining and getting better at. So that connection to opportunity needs to come from a place that really authentically connects with you. So then you can dive in and be better at it.
And then how do you get the feedback? 'Cause I think like, we talked earlier that you also golf and you paddle. And I think that like you need kind of feedback, but you don't get a lot of at-bats. You don't get a lot of games when you're an entrepreneur. So how do you start developing that feeling or that intuition?
Yeah, I think the best explanation I ever got for it was a really great writer called Michael Singer. He started WebMD and a number of other
Yeah.
companies in the US. And it's called the surrender experiment. And it's all about surrendering to what the messages you're getting from the universe around you and what's coming to you, not denying what's in your circle of influence. And then if you can master that circle of influence, just how much bigger your influence gets if you lean into that rather than trying to create something that's outside of your sphere of abilities, connections, and so forth. So making the most of every opportunity we have in front of us. We're lucky that we're in the developed world here, have wonderful opportunities, and that's a massive start. There's a lot of luck involved, along with making sure that you make the most of that luck and make sure that all of your timing is right so you can maximize the opportunities.
I love it. So tell us a little bit about Swisse. So you join, I know we wouldn't want to talk about your story, but I think this is a nice way to illustrate how you get that information, because as I've read, you really get a lot of that information from being on the ground, from being in the stores, from looking at the shelves. So maybe just like walk us through that journey. You joined Swisse. It's a company that's run by a business partner of your father. You kind of have this connection. Your father is a doctor in wellness, and you saw an opportunity for it. What was that opportunity, and how did you come to realize that there was a bigger opportunity for it?
Yeah, so that's this kind of refinement of listening to intuition. How you switch off the noise so as you can be attuned to that is really, really important as the first step. And switching off the noise is kind of that drumbeat of the voice, the internal voice we all have in our head telling us we can do something or we can't, or we're beating yourself up for not delivering as well as you possibly could have. That person you would fire in your life. And so you need to get control of that voice. So as you have clarity, you have space for connecting with your true self. That's not your true self. It's a commentary on who your true self might be. Your true self is deeper. And so I go back to my Swisse journey, and I remember picking up the Swisse bottle as a young kid, 13 or 14 years old, and going, I've got an affinity for this logo for some strange reason. And I can tell you now, the 3 or 4 other investments that we've made down the path that have been around prior to my time are similar connections where I'm familiar with the product. There's something that connects me, some lights that spark beyond our kind of logic knowns. But getting back to the logics, my father is a professor of surgery. He's one of the first people to talk about diet causing disease. In the 70s, he did all of his work. He was laughed at for 20 years. So he'd come home and lecture me, as a professor does, on the frustrations of his day, but I learned so much as a result of that. So this is a feed. It's building my understanding of, what I'm getting better at than others. So that became something that, even though I pushed back on it a little bit, something that I was perhaps a little bit more informed than perhaps someone else. Then I went off, as my rebellious self and following my own kind of gut. I loved film and entertainment. And so this spark of entertainment where there was new movies every week, new personalities in those movies, and then working with people that were my same age or older than me, taking my job as seriously as a university degree, seeing that I was getting paid to learn the language of business from a very young age. Still did university for all of the theoretical, but combining that practical with the knowledge you gain from university and getting ahead really at a young age and learning to manage people, which is, what's everyone's biggest nightmare when they're managing businesses. They talk about the people, how challenging it is as it gets bigger and bigger too, how challenging it is to manage different personalities and scenarios. So mastering that. And then coming back to kind of when opportunities kind of started to fall away within the film industry, seeing that I needed to move industries to kind of advance my career. And so that just gave me this kind of beautiful understanding of the basics of business, but how to scale businesses, because a global business, there was, had its founder and entrepreneurs based in Melbourne where I grew up. And you kind of see them making these brand decisions, making these bold decisions and visions for how to move things. And so then this opportunity through my father's network, he was not a shareholder in Swisse, but he was an advisor for their formulations because he wanted to make sure his patients got the best possible nutrition they could get to deal with their chronic disease. And so, we had all these great personalities around us in wellness. And as I said, I had this great base knowledge that was a little more developed than others. So it made sense for me to strategically move into that kind of category. And so I did that at Swisse, and, it was a small business. And what we needed to do was scale it. And what I had a great experiences in scaling it. but I also had great knowledge about the supplementation and the nutrition profile, combining that. And then the other X factor was that the category was driven by health claims rather than aspiration. And so for me, I'd come from this industry where it was aspirational. I'd tell people that I'd work at Swisse at a barbecue, and I'd say, well, at the embassy. And I'd take supplements. They'd be worried that I'd bring up their irritable bowel syndrome or something like that, and want to talk about health concerns. And, that was so different from a village where, cinemas, movies, everyone wants to talk to you about what's coming out next, what they're up to, and so forth. Like, this has got to change, and so we brought aspiration to the category by bringing great personalities and introducing people's sort of kind of secret weapon, their kind of the nutrition that made them successful.
So what's kind of like the messaging or the promise that you shifted from and to?
Yeah, so it went from an essential health claim like a UTI, this will help with a urinary tract infection, which is still an important part of taking a supplement, to featuring, the captain of the Australian cricket team, who's the second most important person behind the Prime Minister here in Australia, and his nutritional secrets in what is a 5-day game. And then he'd talk about taking our multivitamin, which he actually was taking our multivitamin. The sports dietitian was advising that. So bringing that story to life to say, hey, this was my secret way of kind of being at my best and ensuring that I get the right levels of nutrition to deal with the rigors of professional sport. And so, the design thinking was a key component. That would happen by visiting retailers, our customers, and watching people shop the category and saying, why are you picking this brand over that brand? Having those conversations. So you can do all this sort of marketing research stuff, which is really important, but it's a tool. And so there's other tools which I find as effective, if not even more effective, is going to talk to the people hands-on while they're making decisions. Talking to retailers, I'd say, well, why do you have a whole wall of Centrum, which was owned by Pfizer at the time, one of the biggest companies in the world? I said, why? That you must get the best margin for that product. They go, no. And I'd say, I think it must be an incredible formula. They go, no, it's an okay formula. Yours is better. You retain people when you take it. I go, so why do you sell that? They go, because, it's got great marketing. It's on TV 52 weeks of the year.
It sells itself.
And it sells itself. And they've got great ambassadors. So there was an old marathon runner who was in his 60s at the time endorsing the product. And hence why we just saw, okay, we can do that, but do that even better. We couldn't afford to be on TV 52 weeks of the year, but we could afford to sponsor, a sporting event for a small period of time. And hence why we got the featured people of those sporting events.
Yeah, I hear this over and over again. I'm trying to get my head around it a little bit, but I hear entrepreneurs saying like there is this insight of kind of a big bet that you make on marketing, whether it is just getting on a newspaper or investing $1 million on one ad, or, there is the gut tells you that it's time. Did you get pushback from investing in those kinds of partnerships?
I think the key thing was that when you hear repeatedly from people that sell your product that you're retaining people. You get the confidence to advertise. If you've got a great product, you can invest in it. And so we got that feed in. The other one is we did some research as well. And we had like 70% of people that took our product would keep taking it. And so that was the highest retention in the category. So we went on knowing that if we got the product into more people's hands, we were going to keep those customers.
So if I force this into this idea of customer lifetime value, what does it cost to capture a customer? How often do they buy from you? For how long? What's the profitability? If we look at that customer acquisition cost relative to the lifetime of the customer is a smart investment. But if you're just looking at it first sales, it might look crazy.
Yeah, we would play these tricks, and key was to get a retailer supporting us. So like we'd do lifestyle campaigns as well. So I was doing sporting ones and pitch to Priceline, which is, the second biggest drugstore retailer here in Australia. And the female buyer said to me, 90% of our customers are female. I don't even know who this Ricky Ponting guy is, the captain of the Australian cricket team. I went home and I watched TV with mum, and she was watching Dancing with the Stars. And the host of that was a lady called Sonia Kruger. She loved it. It was the biggest rating program in the country. And we did a deal with her, much to Channel 7's malaise, because we weren't very big at the time. And then we went to Channel 7 and said, we've got Sonia Kruger. We've shot this ad. We want to place it only in Dancing with the Stars, really highly targeted to make sure we maximize the return. And they said no. And I said, well, look, you got to buy by target audience. And I said, well, look, we'll share our sales each week, and we need a 50% increase in our sales for this to be sustainable. And so each week, I showed the sales. We're up about 10, 15%. It wasn't enough. And I convinced them to put us in the show. It was the first lifestyle personality to endorse a product with advertising in the TV shows. So you're cracking the code when you're breaking rules like that and getting approvals and kind of doing something that others aren't doing. And so when that happened, we get over 50% growth. And then we also partnered with that Priceline retailer with a promotion. So then those retailers held more stock. So I'd pre-sell in our stock prior to with the power of that promotion. And that would prepay for the advertising.
The advertising, wow.
Yeah, so worst case, I was always going to break even with the amount of stock that we sold in. And then by the wheel turning through this advertising and through it selling through, and then would have a whole lot of promotional elements with that retail, the stock would sell through and then you'd repeat the reel again. And so each program of advertising, each sponsorship partnership, they would have to qualify the wheel. They'd have to qualify piquing the retailer's interest to really get behind stock, give us the point of sale that we required to capture people's attention at the most important decision-making point of buying the product, and then optimizing that each time and getting bigger and bigger with our crazy ideas. We had Nicole Kidman, we had Ellen DeGeneres, we had Oprah Winfrey, we had Robbie Williams, we had Ricky Martin, all these massive personalities, because we one up ourselves with bigger ideas to take to retail and get them bigger support from them to pay for these bigger promotions. And yeah, it was just an amazing time of growth supported by, wonderful products that delivered for us. There were times too where we would pay a higher for the cost of making our products to get capital that way. So our suppliers would support us with, a higher price on the product, but with extended terms to enable exactly that scenario to happen for us.
Yes.
So we could get cash in our business, because that's a much cheaper form of cash than even loaning from the bank or equity. And then you can look to tidy those things up, knowing that that's an opportunity in the supply chain as you grow and mature.
Great. That's one kind of source of competitive advantage that you have. You talk about culture as being the thing that no one can copy. You've got this flywheel. You've got this higher connection to the brand. When you talk to an entrepreneur, what do you listen for? How do you encourage them to think about how to create that differentiation? Because, there are many entrepreneurs who will say, I can out-execute the competition by just doing the same thing, but doing it faster, better, cheaper.
Yeah. I think all of that really comes back to the climate people work in, or the culture of an environment, how people work as a team.
Mm-hmm.
And I just always love the analogy of the dysfunctional relationship, and perhaps a dysfunctional relationship with an ex-boyfriend, girlfriend. And we know that we are not at our best. And, our best relationships are demanding the most of us, are honest and free-flowing. You challenge each other, but you get the best of each other. And you're in best sync and best flow when you're together. That's the hallmarks of humanity, and relationships is why we do what we do. And so to isolate passion out from our work is just crazy. We all seek as humans love. And so we don't talk about passion in our workplace and a love for what we do. How are we going to do it better than anyone else? We are making a choice to be elite in the choice of our field. Now, I liken this to, let's say, everyone can run, so a 100-meter runner. And if you're blessed with the talent of being the fastest in the world, you're going to have to make a whole lot of sacrifices to live that out and be, the gold medalist at, say, the Olympic Games. And it will dominate your life for whatever period that you're making that choice to be elite in that sport. It is the same thing in business.
I love that.
This is our calling. Why do anything else? And so, regularly ask your team if they are up for that journey. Are they up for these sacrifices? And be generous, share, live in abundance, bring everyone along from that journey. So those sacrifices aren't sacrifices. They're great loves that people want to be on that journey. Now, you're not going to convince everyone, so they're going to be perhaps happier somewhere else in another environment. But as an entrepreneur and as someone that loves to lead high growth businesses, you need to make that call early and demand that of your team early, and make sure everyone is on for, what is going to be setting a global benchmark.
Yes. So then what are the drivers of that high performance? There's the commitment to being high performance. And then I can see, you're only going to work with people who want to make that commitment. What are some of the other aspects of driving or maintaining that high performance culture?
Yeah, look, I think honesty is number one. It's being able to talk freely amongst each other, and that's the first thing people talk about when you're kind of forming values, is they want honesty. Well, honesty is a two-way street. And if you don't have that dialogue in place where, sometimes it's a bit clumsy, where you might, talk about something and needing better from someone, But if you're watching NBA and if it's a quarter time huddle and the team's not engaged with the coach and listening to the feedback on how they can play better, you know they're not going to play well. Now, most office teams and organizations don't have that. You need to talk about system strategies all the time and improvement, and talk about failure safely, and for people to feel like that it's good to fail because you'll get better as a result of that. And making sure that we continually improve as a result of talking about what's gone wrong, as important as about talking about what's gone right. But this is the great issue that happens in a lot of businesses, is that there's a real fear culture. And so we would hero people that, and we still do this day, that make mistakes, and say, well done for trying. That's what it's about. And then let's look to improve from this, because it's going to be the greatest learning that we can make to make sure we get better and stronger.
So let's talk about how you've identified at least one element of this advantage, which is this performance culture. And then there are these others about your brand, about your flywheel, probably the quality of your products, the unique knowledge in the brands that you have. But now as you start scaling, I think that that's where a lot of entrepreneurs, they start shaking, I guess. What do entrepreneurs get wrong, or where do entrepreneurs get surprised when it comes to taking that beautiful flywheel with that one retailer and now you start to scale it into China and globally?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing that founders struggle with is the fact that they can't be across everything, and embedding trust in your organization. And that can only happen through a series of structures that have to be stuck to relentlessly. And so we would do business planning, so finance planning, budget planning, we'd do culture planning, and the values would be alive in the business and in making decisions in the business with those values driving the decisions. So it's no point having a set of values you just have up on the wall and they aren't alive and invigorating the way the organization determines to go forward. And so knowing your language then is alive and well, that you are a big part of setting up those values, gives you peace of mind to not be in every meeting, and giving people parameters on how to not only make decisions based on the financial requirements, but also on the values alignment that you have created for, the reason for why you differentiate and are successful as a business. So that comes with a communications plan. And so my mother it still is a little bit to these days, she's got much better, the biggest nag. But nagging with permission to nag is really key. So after every planning session, we'd go, okay, so what structures are we going to have in place to be like the quarter time huddle, where we can talk about what's going well and not so well? What's the weekly meetings, the monthly meetings that we will commit to? What will we talk about in these meetings to keep us honest on what we've got to perform and deliver? When will be the time that you catch up one-on-one with, your manager to talk about that feedback? And then also, what incidental time are you creating, in particular in this kind of work from home age, where you spend time together getting to know the personality and understanding what might be going on for them personally. So then you can kind of get deeper with people and understand and have empathy, and really then work together to get the best out of each other. Having a coffee together, never have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea by yourself. Make sure it's shared with someone, and you talk about your kind of the issues that you might, or the challenges you're facing in your life.
Yeah. You have this unique duality of kind of this intuitive human kind of being, and then you also have this analytical understanding of the system, right? So I think that if every company has the same culture and every company is a great place to work, there's no differentiation in culture. Maybe you could differentiate yourself because no one else can do it as well as you can. They say that they're going to create this culture of high performance and openness and sharing and challenging, but they don't really pull it off. But maybe you choose your cultural values based off of what makes your company unique. If you're Goldman Sachs, you want a cutthroat culture where everyone's just trying to, win. But if you are maybe at Starbucks, you want more of a collaborative culture. So how do you pick what the cultural norm should be, and how do you use culture as an actual differentiator?
Well, I think you have to be very aware of the industry you're in and what you're trying to create. For Starbucks, you want to create a space that people want to be a part of and spend time in. And so you want to be around people that want to be there. And so the essence of an organization is really the fundamentals of hospitality and care. And, you do meet so many people that shouldn't be in hospitality when you get served by someone in a rude way. It's like you're doing the wrong thing. Yet there are some extraordinary people in that space. And it is the same thing in every industry. If you're in the health game, it's no good if you're selling supplements like we are and you're not into your health. It just doesn't work that way. Like there has to be a different level of comms and language that goes with that.
Yeah.
And every human then is connected. If they're following their intuition, we all like all these different types of things. There are all of these kind of different things going on where people are perhaps more masculine or feminine qualities or the balance of both. And, this comes out through industries and making sure you follow that intuition, follow your connection, and you build on that connection that authentically resonates for you.
So when you look at companies that you might invest in, do you consciously look for that kind of cultural alignment with the industry, or is it more alignment with you?
It's a great question. Look, as I've got older, it's been more focused on kind of stuff that I know where I go to that superpower.
Yeah.
I've tried going every which way and do perhaps what I did at Swisse again, from jumping from entertainment into natural health. And now that I've got this kind of band of experience, doing more around wellness really feels great and growing on that. I have gone into forays since leaving Swisse into, growing an advertising agency that serviced Chemist Warehouse and selling that back to them along with a whole lot of other clients. And that's been incredibly successful. And we've got an agency in the arts and culture space. But I'm not the majority operator of that business. I'm a support act. Whereas if I'm the majority, it's wellness. And then, the other thing we got into which is around banking, which is my whole thing around this kind of us as leaders. There's 4 out of 5 of us work in kind of non-public duty, so private industry. The rest is government, 1 out of 5. So we wait for government to make changes. They're never going to happen. We have the power as business leaders. So, acting with authenticity, creating great cultures where people feel great at work, then feel great at home is going to create a better society. But then also playing around with banking and our partners at Goldman's back in the day that helped us sell Swisse. A few of those people came across and set up our impact fund, which has now become the most successful impact fund in the country. It does affordable housing, social housing, things like that. And so I've stepped in that, but I'll sell out of that over the next 12 months because it's time for me to tap out, having started up, and perhaps focus a little bit more on my wellness side.
Gotcha. So maybe we could bring it then to purpose, because I know you think a lot about purpose. How do you think about purpose?
I think that's the gold dust. It's the magic as to why people are bound behind achieving a team-oriented goal. And so if you can find connection and purpose through financial results, through shared values around what your product does for society, if you can find community organization that you work with and support as a result of the work your business does, or you might mentor through actions or a percentage of profits, a mixture of all those things heavily integrated into your purpose creates a unique environment for why people go to work and why they feel empowered and enriched by what they do. What puts a smile on their face? There are certain meetings that I will walk out of with organizations where my wife knows I've been doing stuff that's highly purpose driven. She just looks at me and smiles. She can guess the 4 or 5 organizations that inspire me.
Do you feel like you have one purpose that you can kind of see reflections in and things that you do that lights you up, or do you have multiple purposes?
I think for me is we have this wonderful balance in the Western world of capitalism and democracy, and it's under threat. And the second best alternative, I should say, is kind of autocratic capitalism, which is a successful model, but it's probably not the model I see myself. It doesn't spark the most joy for me. I see my role as to nurture this balance and to provide more great new stories by infusing a purpose that is impactful on society in a business. And that can be from providing a great workplace culture through to doing community initiatives that might spark as a result of business initiatives in a business. The joy that people get from giving back and supporting community is something that really excites me.
Okay, got it. I would be remiss not to take a little time just to ask you about marketing and brand building. You have had such a phenomenal record in that, and I'm sure a lot of it just comes intuitively to you. But what can you share with us for people for whom it is less intuitive that is particularly impactful?
Yeah, I think the simplest thing is that the answers are in front of you. Your competitors will be doing a lot of good advertising in your market space. but you can't be the same as those competitors. You need to break the rules and break the function of how you kind of reinvent getting to the classic consumer in your category. And so always look to an industry outside of yours and look for disruption to occur by the clash of those two industries. So a refreshment and refinement of ideas in the way you present your brand really creates a point of difference. So I think of classic examples like Apple and how back when phones were just phones, they took music, phones, the personal computer and clashed them into one and marketed themselves with such clean simplicity that it just really stood out for a category that was probably driven by a mindset of people that weren't that interesting and that weren't that inspirational to then become one of the most cutting edge brands that everyone now carries around every day is just a great example of what you should be trying to achieve in your category. How do we break the rules and take the whole industry forward? And how do we market with that vision? And there's plenty of great examples in the Apple history of how they've done that as well.
I can appreciate the messaging part of it. And I think the messaging times the reach is kind of the impact. How do you know how much to invest in or if you are reaching enough or if you need to reach more?
Yeah, I think the greatest thing about marketing is an investment that doesn't go away. The banks don't treat it that way when you buy machinery or an investment property, but brand is what people pay for in the end in my space. Every investment you make, you should be thinking about it as not only an investment in getting the sales in front of you and trying to de-risk it as much as possible, like we talked about with that flywheel move, but also understanding that every time you invest, you're enhancing the reputation of your brand. And your reputation of your brand improves the path to people making a purchase of your product. So understand that, yes, while some marketing might not go absolutely to plan and you've got to break down as to the reasons why it hasn't in delivering you the sales you need. And, sales should be the ultimate driver. Taking that risk to invest in your brand is the massive first step we all need to make and get very comfortable with because, that's what's going to make or break your valuation in the sort of businesses that I invest in.
Great. Is there a particular framework or tool or business concept that you found particularly useful? You've mentioned the flywheel, and it may be something that just you think we all know already.
I think it's so important to invest in people that you love being around and work with people you love being around. You just get better out of each other. And it doesn't mean that you all need to be the same and you need to pat each other on the back. I love being around people that challenge me. And understanding that being challenged is going to get you a better result. So, lean into some of the relationships that on the face of it, this is not someone I normally hang around with, but gee, they're super sophisticated in how they go about stuff. And you learn to have an appreciation and respect for them as a result of that. Those are the sorts of really fruitful relationships where you bring the yin and the yang, but so much joy as a result of that.
Yeah, and I love that. You're creating this cohesion of this team with one purpose or a common purpose and common culture, achieving something bigger together, performing higher together. And I see that you're a learner. So how do our entrepreneurs continue to learn?
Yeah, I think it'd be really easy for me to take the comfortable path in life. And I make sure that at least every day I'm going to put myself in a situation where I'm not comfortable, where I need to push myself and stretch myself to be better at what I do. Or, it being as simple as hosting functions for a community that I can't believe I'm getting involved with, but I'm trying to solve their challenges. But I'm stretching myself to hear other people's voices through to, even doing podcasts like this or speaking in front of audiences, staying fresh, making sure that we continue to stretch our concepts, our ideas, our version of what our world is. I recently did a men's retreat where it was 4 days of yoga and meditation and talking openly amongst men about our problems and challenges. It was a good 18 men. And I was out in the freezing cold in intense in the middle of winter here.
Wow.
It was fantastic for the soul, but, it's not something that I was like, oh, wow, that's in the calendar. I can't wait for that. I was like, how's this going to go? And I can't believe I'm giving up 4 days of my time for this with no one that I know really well in that environment. But it went spectacularly well, and I feel much better as a result of it.
Gotcha. Well, Radek, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us and the insights from it. Thank you, Radek, for being here.
Very kind of you to have me. So thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Strategy at Scale. Thank you to our guest, Radek Sali, our producer, Oscar Perez, and our teams at Scaling Up, Outthinker, and Growth Institute. If you like what you heard, please follow, download, and subscribe. I'm Kai-Han Krippendorf. We'll catch you soon with another episode of Strategy at Scale.